let's see what Judaism is made of today. Yeah? Let's start with, actually not with Judaism, but something called the ugaritic religion. The Canaanite religion. Yeah? So the Canaanites, in the Bible story, the Canaanites are the people who inhabit this area of Israel and Palestine. Yeah, in Palestine. So, but if you know a little bit about the biblical story, you know that Moses took the Israelites from Egypt, right, in the Exodus, into Canaan. But it's not like there were no people living there. There was actually people living there before, so they had their own beliefs, of course. Yeah. So let's try to study this before, because you're going to see echoes of what I'm going to talk about in the next 10, 15 minutes. Yeah. So we are in the year around 1300. Yeah, this is the Bronze Age, and we have the Hittite Empire. So this is modern day Turkey, right here. Okay, and Troy would be located somewhere here, right, in the East Mediterranean. And we're going to focus on a town that is called Ugarit. Yeah? And you can see here that at that time, the Egyptians had conquered quite a lot of Palestine and Israel as well. But we're going to focus on a town here called Ugarit, because this is a very ancient empire, by the way, super ancient empire, like from around 2,000 years before Christ, something like that. And at this time, more or less, between the year 1300 and 1500, these peoples right here in Ugarit wrote these tablets. And you can see that they are written in this, the notches in this language that I explained in the Babylonian mythology. Yeah? These tablets are very interesting. They were discovered in the 1920s, and they explain the religion that these people had around this point in time, in the year 1200 before Christ, more or less. So we're going to look at what kind of beliefs they had. Yeah? And what I can tell you right away is that this empire right here, it was very influenced by Babylon and by Babylonian beliefs. Yeah? And so if we look at these tablets, by the way, they are in fragmentary state, so it means that they are not complete. It's not like we understand 100% what their religion was made of, but we understand quite a bit, actually. And so these Ugaritic people believed in a major god called El. Okay? When you actually imagine, when you have in your mind the image of God of the Old Testament and the New Testament, you imagine him with a beard, right? Like here, Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel. Well, actually, this conception of God, El, yes, this wise God, all-knowing, it was the God for the people living in Ugarit. Yeah? He was a God that was wise, and here I have some notes. He was wise, he was called also the Father, he was merciful, and he was also a creator and had many sons. Yeah? And among one of these, let's say, maybe not direct son, but in the family was this other God here, who was called Baal. And here you have a statue of Baal. And Baal, as many other stories, many other mythologies, he's the god of thunder. Yeah? So you can see him here carrying a bolt. Yeah? See him here, quite aggressive. Yeah? So Baal is the god of thunder, the god of rain also. And what happens, these tablets that I was telling you about, they tell the story about a fight between El, who is the head of the gods, the god of the sky, and Baal. Because, you know, always in these mythologies, as I have been explaining, for example, in the Greek mythology, there are lots of fights. In the Babylonian mythology, there are also lots of fights. So, of course, they have to fight one another. Yeah? So in these tablets, what we're told is that Baal starts a war against El, because El has become some sort of a deus absconditus. And what that means is a god, right, that has created the universe, let's say, but that he doesn't really care too much about keeping it working. Yeah? So he just created the universe and doesn't do anything else. So this inaction of the god of the gods, let's say, prompts another younger god to say, no, I want to seize power and do something about this creation that is beneficial for all of us. And so they fight together, right? And one of the very interesting things that Baal does is that when you read the text, he cuts something of El and then becomes king. And this something falls to the ground, and then he becomes king. And if you know anything about the Greek mythology, you know that Kronos castrates Uranus, yes, and then becomes the new king of the gods. Now this makes a lot of, this something of course are the genitals, yeah? And it makes a lot of sense to do this in these mythologies, because once you cut the genitals from El, he cannot procreate, yeah? So he becomes sterile and basically useless. Yeah? So this is what Baal does. And Baal, what happens? Baal becomes the king, and then takes his throne. Yeah, and Baal, both Baal and El, being gods of the sky, they are also associated to bulls. Yeah, bulls. Just like Zeus, for example, when he kidnaps Europa, right? Why bulls? Well, I have talked about this in the Babylonian mythology already. The bull is a symbolism for the god of the sky, the god of thunder, that has been here since the prehistory. So since times of the thousands of years ago, yeah, we have the symbolism of the bull as a proxy for the powers of the sky. And here I had one picture showing Gilgamesh, for example. He's the protagonist of a very, very old Babylonian story that takes on the bull of heaven. Yeah. Why was that? I showed it in the Babylonian mythology, but basically the bellow of a bull, that sounds like this, hopefully we can hear it. This bellow is associated to thunder. This is what, it's ominous, right? It's scary. And this is the kind of parallelism that since prehistory we humans have made. The bull is the god of thunder and is related to the sky, and you will see how important this becomes later. Right. So Baal is, as I say, he takes on El, right? His king, and basically he moves to, of course, a mountain. Yeah. I have always said also for example, in the Greek mythology, you have that mountains are very important. You have Mount Olympus, yeah? And we will see later that mountains keep being important for Judaism. Why? Because the mountain is a very, very important symbol for religious matters, because it gets you closer to heaven, yeah? That's basically it. You have better signal, yeah? Let's say, better divine signal. So he moves to a mountain, okay? And this mountain, by the way, is in the north of Syria. So what happens then is we have this god El, who is this god wise, right? And then we have the god of thunder, the real god of thunder and rain, and they fight, and Baal wins, but El, of course, he wants to get his power back. So what he does, this wise god, is he sends Baal a sea serpent, yeah? A sea serpent, and tries to kill Baal, this sea serpent. Now, this sea serpent is a reminiscence also about the myth of creation of Babylonian Babylonian mythology, sorry. Just change sea serpent by Tiamat. Is a really, really bad serpent. But you can see here the Babylonian influence. And what happens is that Baal, this god of the thunder, kills the dragon, yeah? And the dragon comes from the waters. Now, I have also talked about this before, but in the Bible, you have verses that talk about such a fight. Yeah? You have verses that talk about such a fight. So, for example, these verses tell us about you divided the sea by the strength, you break the heads of the dragons in the water. And then we have more verses, for example, that say, you break the head of Leviathan, this sea monster, into pieces, and gave him the meat to the people inhabiting the wilderness. And this is in the Psalms. What I mean by this is that the Bible contains traces of these stories as well. Because these stories have been there forever, basically. Since the moment we could write down these stories, they have been there, yeah? And otherwise, they were spoken, they were transmitted like this. So okay, we have Baal, yeah? Again, Baal, this guy, this god of the thunder, he kills the serpent, and this serpent is living in the sea. Now, what this means also is that Baal, by killing the serpent in the sea, he basically orders the world. Why? Because Baal is the god of rain. Baal is the god of rain, is the rain of the seasons. Yeah? And by killing the monster of the sea, basically it tells you that the rain dominates whatever storms you may get from the sea, which are unpredictable. Yeah? So Baal is a very primitive god in reality. It's just the god of the rain that appears in so many different religions and so many different stories. So by killing the serpent, as I say, Baal, here we see actually God, but you can think that this is Baal actually. Yeah? Baal kills the serpent, he orders the world, and then the seasons become more, let's say, you can predict the seasons, right? And for you living in these places, as I showed you in the south of Anatolia, it's very important for you to have rain. Because with rain, you have life. Without rain, you cannot do anything. So it is very, it's obvious, right, that these people would consider the god of the rain to be a very powerful and important god. Okay? Now, I promise you that it's going to be worth it. Have this in the back of your mind, okay? Short summary. There are people living in Israel, let's say north of Syria, that believe in a God that is all-wise, El, but another God, Baal, the god of thunder, the god of rain, takes over his place. That's it. Have it in the back of your mind. Now we're actually going to start talking about the beginnings of Judaism. And you might know that the God of the Jews has different names, but one of them is Yahweh. Yeah? You know that, Yahweh. So Yahweh, this is the God of the Jews. It's written like this with 4 letters, and I will get to why later. Now I'm going to try to explain its origin as a function, let's say here, of Abraham, a very important character of the Bible. Some tribes we will call the Shasul, and then also Moses. Yeah? The way to approach the origin of the Jewish God, you can do it in many ways, right? I mean, you can just pick the Bible and start reading, right? And if you pick the Bible and start reading, then the first thing you will read here in the Genesis is that God has always been there. So there is no origin of God. He has always been there. Yeah? But we're here to think for ourselves also and to try to understand, okay, but there are many nuances to this, right? So the first thing we're going to do is, instead of picking the Bible and just reading, what we're going to do is we're going to look at extra biblical evidence, which means that we're going to look at sources, archaeological sources or texts that don't have anything to do with the Bible, yeah? And maybe have been only recently discovered. The short story about the origin of the God of the Jews, this Yahweh, is that we don't know where he comes from. That's the very, very, very short answer. But we do have some clues of when maybe it originated and the peoples that first believed in this kind of God. I'm going to throw a bunch of names here, but I'm going to try to make it as clear as possible. So we are also around, this late Bronze Age, around 1350 BC. And we have one of the Egyptian pharaohs. And what he's doing here, what he writes here in these hieroglyphs is he boasts about conquering this and that tribe, right? And he tells us about some people here that we don't, as I say, we really don't know how to read this, but maybe it is the Yahweh of Shasuland, yeah? Or this could also be read as Yahoo, we don't know, but some sort of reference to these 4 letters that I showed you before appear here, Yahweh of Shasulan. And basically what he's telling us is that there are these tribes living around here in the Sinai Peninsula, in the Median area right here, that he calls his enemies. Yeah? And this is the very, very, very earliest account that we have of this Yahweh name appearing anywhere. Yeah? And so the Shasu, as I wrote here, they are pastoralists. They are tent-dwelling nomads, yeah? Living in Edom, northern Arabia, in this area right here. Yeah? This is the Sinai, okay, and this is Egypt right here. So I have been reading a lot about this, and as I say, there is no clear consensus, but perhaps one of the things that we can say about these peoples right here that call Yahweh, this name right here it's not the name of a deity, but it's some sort of toponym. Yeah? So it's not a theonym, but it's a toponym or a denonym. So there were people here maybe that they call themselves the peoples of Yahweh because they lived in this place that they call whatever, yeah? Yahweh, Yahu. Yeah? So we're really, really, really back in time. If you look at this is more than 3,000 years ago. Yeah. So this is the first instance of the name that we find. Yeah. And as you see, they are some people that dwell in tents and they are nomads. Yeah. Then actually we have to move a little bit later to get the first account of the word Israel. Israel, the word only appears, let's say, 100 so years later, in the 13th century BCE. And basically, this is another emperor. It's the Mernetaf stele, so it's a rock of victory, as I say. So it's another pharaoh boasting about subjugating these and that people. So he's saying here that I basically wasted the seed grain of Israel. Yeah, you have to read this from the right. So Israel here appears as some sort of foreign people. Yeah, so foreign people living in the hill country in South Canaan, so the south of Palestine, in the Transjordan Mountains, let's say. And these people, Israel, yeah, they are not the same people that I showed you before, this Shasu. Yeah? So the Shasu lived here, and these people that are called Israel, yeah, they actually lived in the south of Canaan. So it's not exactly the same people, which means that maybe they didn't have the same God. Yeah? And this rock doesn't mention any God attributed to Israel. So what this is telling us is that probably Israel, the peoples of Israel that call themselves belonging to Israel, appeared having another kind of God that was not Yahweh. Yeah? That's the point. And actually we have to go a little bit further into 840 BC, where we actually see Yahweh and Israel together. So Yahweh, the God of the Jews, associated to a people that call themselves Israel. And this is in 840 BC. And this is from a king in that area that also boasts about some war victories here, defeating the Israelites. And he says that he took the vessels of Yahweh to Chemosh. Yeah? Is the chief god of Moab. So it's some guy that invades the Israelites and basically is proud for saying, hey, I took your relics with me, that contain your God, and screw you. So, but this is very good for us, because then we know that Israel and Yahweh are together. And so these people living in Israel had a God called Yahweh in 840. And here you can see the name, yeah? Yahweh. I told you that it has 4 letters. Yeah? So this is the earliest, really, instance that we have for this. I know it's a bit complicated, but as I told you, we don't really know where Yahweh comes from. Yeah? A short summary would be that it may have come from some sort of tribe living in the Sinai Median Peninsula, yeah? And that these peoples, called the people of Yahweh, maybe made it into Israel, and then Israel finally adopted their God. Yeah? So not a simple story, not as simple as opening a book and saying, well, God was here since forever. That's not the way it is. Mm. But equally interesting is to look at the biblical literature. Yeah? And if we start from the beginning, so we have the book of Genesis where God creates the world, etc., 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 and we have a lot of people there, and then Noah comes, and there's the great flood, and blah, blah, blah. And then basically what happens is that God appears himself to a guy called Abraham, yeah? And this guy is living here in Ur in Babylon. Yeah? And he tells him, I'm your God, and you're destined to have, you'll be the forefather for all of these people that will be preaching me also. Yeah? So this God, what is the sort? And here is the typical picture of. It's like God tells Abraham, well, if you actually love me, you have to sacrifice your son Isaac. And he says, okay, I will do that to prove it. And then right before he's going to kill his son, God comes in and says, I was just joking. Yeah. That's what he says. That's what he says. It's very famous, yeah, this episode. Now, what is the historicity of this? Of course, it's impossible to know if there was a guy called Abraham and he did all of this. And also, it's in contradiction with what I just told you, right? Because we're talking about Babylon here, or the Babylonian, the Tigris and the Euphrates valley. But I was saying that maybe Yahweh originated in this sort of area, right? So this is contradictory. But what does seem to be historically accurate is that around those times, this was 2,000 years ago, 1,200. So you can see between 2,000 and 1,200, there were lots of tribes moving, nomad tribes, moving along the valley and settling into here the Jordan River, along the Jordan River. And these tribes had this sort of patriarchic religion, which put a lot of focus on family and the father. Yeah? The father is very important, and the family itself as well. So there is evidence that these sort of tribes, that valued a lot kinship, moved along this line right here and settled around the area we're interested in. Now you can start to see that we have lots of vectors, pointing towards the origin of Judaism. We have the Shasu, we have the Israelites, now we have these sort of tribes coming in. So my point is that there are lots of stories going on here, in this melt pot of cultures. And another way that we have to understand the origins of Yahweh by just reading the Bible is that the Bible is written in Hebrew, the Old Testament, but in many kinds of Hebrew. And you can see that the times here are so, the time span is so large that Hebrew itself evolves. And what we can do is look at the Hebrew that any chapter has been written in, and then we can try to date when that chapter was written. And so if we do this, and we try to look at all the books in the Old Testament, and we try to see what kind of chapter or verses are the oldest written, then we come to this. And it's a very interesting story here. It's called the Song of Deborah, Judges 5. And we think that this was written in the 12th century BC. It's really, really, really old. And what does this song tells us? Well, it says, when you, Lord, went out from Seir, and when you marched from the land of Edom, the earth shook, the heavens powered, the clouds poured down water. The mountains quaked before the Lord, one of Sinai, before the Lord, the God of Israel. Look at this. The earth shook, the heavens poured, the clouds poured down water. And this is one of the oldest stories that we have in the Bible, dated by comparing Hebrew. What this tells us is that the very, very old Yahweh, the very, very old God of the Jews, was a God of rain. Again, it's very important. The rain, it's characteristic, right? It's the rain. And this is not a surprise. Again, so many cultures have this. you're living in close to the desert, so of course you value rain above everything else. Yeah, and actually, these people here, if you remember that I told you that these people of Israel maybe were living in the Transjordan Mountains, so in the south of Canaan, yeah, in the south of Canaan, with the border with Jordan. I don't know if any of you have been to Petra in Jordan, but you know Petra, no? It's this tomb for a king. It's very beautiful, yeah. And what happens in Petra, in these sort of places, is that still to this day, there are flash floods, meaning a flood that appears out of nowhere and can be devastating. And this is one of these flash floods. I don't know if
the deluge came barreling down
you can see
the valley
here,
with a thunderous roar, sweeping away everything in its path.
This is one sort of the...
Visitors expecting the serenity of Petra's 2,000-year-old architecture
You can see it
had
here.
to scramble frantically to higher ground as the water raged beneath them. Around 3,500 tourists were in the area at the time, but none were injured.
There are flash floods that are very, very dangerous in this same sort of area where we think that these verses were written. And these verses are telling us that the earth shook, the heavens poured, the clouds poured down water. Perhaps Yahweh was the God of this rain, and it was feared. I mean, it was scary. If you would anger this guy, you would have these sort of events that we have just seen in Petra. Yeah? So this is one more evidence, and I'm going to try to put it all together soon. Yeah? And so we have also in the biblical story, no, we have the story of Exodus. We have the story of how Moses learns about this God that he has seen. Yeah, and if you know the story, well, what happens is that Moses is in Egypt, and the Pharaoh is very, very mean to the Israelites living there, and basically Moses kills by accident one Egyptian, and what happens is that he goes to this mountain, very important, mountain, because you're close to God, yeah? He goes to this mountain and he sees this burning bush, and it's the voice of God telling him, oh, this is holy ground, you need to take off your sandals. Okay, so he goes there, and he sees the burning bush here, and God reveals his name, yeah? Because Moses tells God, okay, what should I call you? What should I call you? No? And he said, God said to Moses, I am who I am. And this is written like this. Okay? This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent to you. Now what a name for a God. Yahweh, we are told here, Yahweh, yeah, this Yahweh we have been talking about all the time, according to Moses, means I am who I am. Now, what kind of a name is this again? Instead of calling himself Zeus or Marduk or Odin, he calls himself I am who I am. This is actually a pretty cool name, I would say, because I am who I am, it's just telling you that God is. God is there, and that's all you need to know. Don't ask more questions. It's too complicated for you. You're just a tiny human. You just have to know that I am. And this is all you need to know. Yeah? So, a little bit of everything here, right? First, we saw how we have these Egyptian sources telling us that there were some sort of people living in Sinai that then moved to these mountains in the south of Canaan where it rains a lot, right? And maybe Yahweh was some sort of rain deity in the early 900s or thousands before Christ, right? And then we have all of these stories revealing his name, right? But if you remember the introduction, I told you that when Moses, quote unquote, goes with the Israelites to Canaan, there were people living there, okay? So it was not empty. So what's going to happen is that Yahweh is going to meet he's going to meet the religion that I told you in the beginning. And what's going to happen is going to be very interesting. Yeah? A little bit more of history. around at the end of the Bronze Age, something very weird happens in the Mediterranean, which is that very important civilizations in the east of the Mediterranean, they just collapse. And we don't really know why. Maybe it was some sort of climate event, who knows? Yeah? Something very weird happened. And what happens is that there is a lot of emigration from these regions in Anatolia and the north of Syria, even Crete. There is a lot of people that have to move out. And where do they go? They go to the south, to the Egyptians, yeah? And they also move to Canaan, yeah? Seeking refuge. Here is a very cool hieroglyph, and it's Ramses III against what they called the Seas people, so these refugees. Yeah? And you can see that more than refugees, this looks like a zombie apocalypse. Yeah? Something bad is going on here. Anyway, so there is a lot of people moving to Egypt, so Ramses tries to contain them, and as you can see here, basically what happens is that all of these people try to settle in around this area. So as I said before, this area, if it wasn't multicultural enough, it becomes a melting pot of all sorts of religions and cultures, yeah? And so we have the people that lived here before, the Canaanites, with this god El, the wise god, and Baal as their gods. And then we have the so-called Israelites, right? That have this god Yahweh, that is a god of the rain, but he is also a warrior god. Yeah? And what happens is that they all come inside here and they start interacting with one another, of course. And there is another very, very old verse, or a very, very old chapter in the Bible. This is Deuteronomy 32:8. And it goes like this. It's very interesting to read it. It says, when the Most High, and this is El, it's actually in Hebrew, El, yeah? Gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God, the Israelites. What this means is that El was here, and El recognized that there were some people here, yeah, that were the Israelites, that had the God Yahweh. And what this is trying to tell us is that El said, okay, Yahweh, you can have these lands here. So much for the one God, Yahweh. Yeah? You actually have a higher deity telling you that you can stay here, actually. Yeah? Now, this is very, very, very interesting. And so around this time, what happens is that there is a very, very complex merge between the two religions. Yeah? So we have El and Baal on one side, and we have this god Yahweh on the other side, and throughout several centuries, they interact together. Yeah? And it's a very difficult process. Yeah? But there is also one story in the Bible, maybe you know about it, that when Moses is with the Israelites, right, and they are leaving Egypt, he goes up the same mountain that I showed you before, and he gets the 10 Commandments, yeah? But he spends some time in the mountain. So whilst people are waiting in the skirt of the mountain, basically they say, okay, we're just going to start idolatrizing other gods. Yeah? And so they build this golden calf, yeah? And they start praying to it. And then Moses, when he comes back from the mountain, he says, oh, what the hell are you doing? You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to be praying to Yahweh, not this golden calf. Yeah? Golden calf, a small cow, bull, again. Yeah? And what scholars think about this episode is just a dramatization of how the people who were more Yahwists, so the people who believed more in Yahweh than El, they didn't like that the people who were closer to El were praying to the bull, because as I told you, El was also associated to a bull. Yeah? So this is just a dramatization of this complex mix that I'm telling you about. Yeah? So there are lots of tensions here. Huh? And actually there are so many tensions that Yahweh the God of the Israelites, he's actually going to fight Baal, who was, if you remember, that God of the thunder, yeah, that was living in Israel. And now it's when we come into the fascinating world of the prophets. Yeah? If I ask you what a prophet is, what would you say? What kind of image do you have of a prophet in any kind of setting? Is it someone with a crystal ball, maybe, trying to guess which cards you have? No, what do you think? No, maybe, isn't this more or less what you have in mind as a prophet? Yeah, someone who sees, yeah? Someone who sees the future, someone who, it's a prophecy, no? It's something that may happen in the future, something about magic, right? And this is exactly what the early prophets were about. So in the Canaanite religion, we have these seers, yeah? And the seers in the Canaanite religion, remember, it's not the same as the God of Yahweh, the God Yahweh. So we have, for example, in this verse here, Samuel 9:9, we say that formerly in Israel, if someone went to inquire of God, they would say, "Come, let us go to the seer," because the prophet of today used to be called a seer. So it was much more ritualistic and magic. That's really the kind of image that we have. And now it's very interesting to see that our mages, no, wizards, you see them always with a magic wand. And I wanted to ask you, why do you think that wizards have a magic wand? Alex, what do you think? But why, ultimately, would a person with magical powers have a magic wand? What is a magic wand? I mean, it's a stick, yeah? It's a stick, yeah? Whoever has the stick has the force and has the power, yeah? If I beat you with a stick, yeah, it will hurt, yeah? So first and foremost, it denotes power, yeah? That I have the power. I am the one with the stick, yeah? Why the stick? Exactly. Why the stick? And this is my own theory, but let's see if you agree with this. Have you ever been in the forest with a small kid? Yeah. What is the first thing that they do? They pick a stick and they start poking around everything, right? So, in a sense, the stick is extending your sense of touch. Yeah. You reach places where others cannot reach. So I have a stick, I can reach here and I can touch this. Yeah? And so it's this sort of symbology, right? The stick is also wisdom, right? Elderly people, they walk with a stick. Yeah? So it's very interesting. And why do kids go around poking things with the stick? That's maybe because our brain does a fantastic job at remapping our surrounding and making us believe that whatever we're touching is part of us. Like, for example, when we drive a car, it really is a part of ourselves. Like, you don't think that there is a car there, it's actually you moving. Yeah? So maybe by poking around the forest with a stick, the kid is training this sort of magical ability that we have and getting acquainted with it. Yeah? Very, very interesting. So, okay, in the beginning we have these seers, yeah? So it's more magical. If you're a king, you're going to sit with the seer and he's going to tell you what to do in order to win the next war or whatever, yeah? But then prophets are concerned more with God himself, because I'm telling you that we're talking about Yahweh. And what prophets start to do is they start warning people to pray to the right God, yeah? Because we see a lot of gods here. There is Baal, there is El. El has been incorporated into the Yahweh's cult, right? But then there is Baal, and as I told you, Baal was the god of the rain that killed the serpent, yeah? So we have Baal, that is one god of the rain, but then we have another god of the rain that is Yahweh, and the sky is too small for two gods of the rain. It's not gonna fly. It's too many gods of the rain. There has only to be one, okay? And in the Bible, if you thought that I was digressing too much in the introduction when I told you about Baal and El, no, Baal is in the Bible, and the prophets are, let's say, the sort of ideologists of the religion that try to tell you that Baal is the wrong god to pray to. And so we have in the 9th century BCE, for example, we have this guy Elijah, and this episode is super funny and terrible at the same time, because basically there are all of these people, right, praying to Baal, and Elijah comes and says, no, but this is not the right God, and I'm going to show you why. And what happens is that, come on, build an altar or something. There are 450 of them. It's like, build an altar and pray to your god Baal to show up, and you'll see that he's not the right God. And so they build this altar, and they're praying to Baal, and nothing happens. Yeah? And then he says, now, let me show you how it's done. Yeah? And so he builds this altar, and he says, Yahweh, you're the true God, manifest yourself. And then what happens is he manifests himself and starts pouring rain, and there is thunder. Again, it's the God of the rain. Yeah? And then what happens is that they say, look, you see, I was right. And then it says, then Elijah commanded them, seize the prophets of Baal, 450, yeah? Don't let anyone get away. They seized them, and Elijah had them brought down to the Kishon Valley and slaughtered them. That's a little violent episode, yeah? in the Bible. And whether God was good back then, as I mentioned in the previous lecture, and you can watch it online, I mean, there are instances in the Old Testament where God is a bit of a jerk, to say the least. So you see that the prophets, like Elijah, are there to make sure that people pray to the right God. Yeah? In the end, the story favored Yahweh, yeah? And Yahweh wins over Baal, and so he's the only one God left. Yeah? But in this, in the meantime, throughout all this journey, Yahweh has been picking elements from all of the different religions that I will show you later as well, because we will go from a God that is the God of the rain and the God of war to a God that creates. That is quite a high, a very important difference, yeah? Just like El. So, okay, the people of Baal are gone. Forget about Baal, this God of the rain. Gone. What the prophets are going to do next is, I tried to summarize it, and I can only think of these words. I know it's too modern, maybe, but they are gaslighting Israel. So, well, and you will see what I mean with this. For example, 8th century BC, and all of this is history already, so this book starts with very esoteric knowledge, no? But then there's actually history there. And what happens is that you have these invasions by the Assyrians, right? Into Judea and all of this place here, the Jordan River, Jordan Valley. And of course, this is not good for the population living there. And what happens is that prophets like Isaiah and Hosea, they basically blame Israel for it. It's like, look, Israel, you were told to behave good, you were told not to pray Baal, you were told not to be idiots against each other, but you're still insisting on the wrong path. This is coming for you. This invasion that you had from the Assyrians, it's your fault. So you better learn from it. And this is why I said gaslighting, yeah? Because the prophets are telling them, the Israelites, that they are not the right, they are supposed to be the people of God, but they don't act like it. Yeah? They're not grateful enough, etc., etc. Okay? So you have these prophets here telling them this. And then what do you think? I mean, seeing that the people of Israel, right, the chosen people of God, who, by the way, God chose Israel for their people. And Israel is the only country in the Middle East without oil. I don't know why he did that. Why would he do that? There are many other countries with oil, but no, he chose Israel. Anyway, so, God would be pissed off, right? This is what the prophets are saying. God is pissed off with you, and you got to learn how to behave better. God has two options. Let it go and say, well, they will improve. Or he could do exactly the same as he did in the book of Genesis, send a flood, kill everyone, and start again. Okay, this is what he could do. Yeah, this is the flood. But God, I mean, he says, should I do this again? No, actually not. So what the prophets say, and especially Isaiah, is something very interesting. Isaiah says, you're behaving very bad. But you know what's going to happen? God is going to be good to you eventually. So he says this, Isaiah writes this. Yeah? Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. It says, the virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and we'll call him Immanuel, he who is with God. Okay, and then there are other verses here, and he talks about this he's going to redeem the sins of all of these Israelites that are behaving very poorly. And he says, but surely he took up our pain before our suffering, yet we consider him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. So this sort of sign that God is going to send is going to end badly, actually. He will have good intentions, but something bad is going to happen. And he even says, but he was pierced, pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed from our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. This is a prophecy that Isaiah talks about. So instead of, Israel has been behaving very, very badly, but instead of sending a lightning bolt that obliterates everyone or a flood, he says, okay, I'm going to be good with you, and we're going to try to sort this out when I send someone that will fix the mess. Yeah? Needless to say, these verses right here are super important for Christians. Yeah? Because in this son that the virgin conceives and was pierced and his wounds are healed, of course, there's going to be a guy in Galilee several centuries later, a guy by the name of Yeshua bin Joseph, yeah? Some sort of Yeshua, son of Joseph, that is going to say that he is this guy. Or maybe not, we will see in the next lecture. But you can see here, right? Okay, so Israel has been behaving very bad, but there start to be these visions that God is going to fix the mess at some point. But the time passes, and there is a very, very, very big calamity here, very important calamity that I have been talking about several times in the lectures. And it's called the Babylonian captivity. Yeah? What happens here is that, okay, we're in the year 597, and a Babylonian king by the name of Nabucodonosor goes into Judea, and he destroys the temple and exiles the most important Jewish people and rulers to Babylon. Yeah? So the temple of Jerusalem is erased, and Yahweh is supposed to be living there, just like the gods of the Canaanites lived in temples. When I told you about Ugarit, all of those gods had a temple. So all of a sudden, we have that the temple is destroyed. What happens to Yahweh? And the religion seems to die off, of course, because, okay, we lost our land, the promised land, right? So people are very mad at themselves because they say, okay, we did this to ourselves, we were bad people. And then they move to Babylon, and they stay in Babylon for around 60 years. Yeah? All could be lost. Maybe Judaism would have died then. If they would have continued along the path that they followed for several centuries, maybe the religion would have died. But actually the theologians at the time, the people who were actually writing these verses and stories, were very smart. And they came up with a Copernican revolution, let's say. Yeah? So they turned the religion upside down, almost. Because we have people like Ezekiel. Yeah? Ezekiel was a Jewish prophet writing in Babylon during the time of the captivity, and he had epileptic seizures. Like, you read the texts of Ezekiel. Ezekiel is one of the longest books of the Bible also, so he's very verbose. And he starts with this vision of God as the cloud with the thunders, and it describes how angels are supposed to look, and you have these sort of very weird creatures with many eyes. I mean, it's just very crazy, but actually you can read neurological studies about the book of Ezekiel, and every neurologist says, this is epileptic seizures. Yeah, but despite of his medical conditions, what this man tells us is that, number one, the temple has been destroyed in Jerusalem, but that doesn't mean that God dies. It means that God lives within us, and we are all responsible for carrying the message of God. So let's say that Judaism becomes individualized. Yeah? Instead of just sticking to praying to Yahweh in a temple, then all of us are supposed to pray to him and to keep his message alive. Number two, it's also very clear that since Israel has been savaged and pillaged, and the peoples of Israel are no more, then this God that was called Yahweh goes from being a God, to being the God. Okay? This is a major change. Is the God, not only of the Israelites, of everyone. He's there. Yeah? And also there are these very Ezekiel also, and the people that come after him, they became very interested while they were in Babylon. They became interested in eschatology, and eschatology just means the sort of what happens after death. Yeah, so these writers became very interested in what happens after death and at the end of the world, while they were in Babylon. And that is not a coincidence, because you, Alex, attended the lecture on Zoroastrianism, and we know that Zoroastrianism, the Persian religion, so even more to the east, was the original, the real deal about eschatology and what happens at the end of the world. So for sure, they got acquainted with these sort of visions, these sort of beliefs, with the Zoroastrians. And then, for example, Ezekiel, even if the Israelites are exiled into Babylon, etc., he is optimistic nonetheless, because he writes about the valley of dry bones, and he says, "Dry bones, hear the word of the Lord." He says, "This is what the sovereign Lord says to these bones: I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life. I will attach tendons to you and make flesh come upon you and convert you with skin, and I will put breath in you, and you will come to life. Then you will know that I am the Lord." As I told you, this is a time when they are very depressed. They are living in Babylon. And this guy comes in and says, if you believe in Yahweh, in the end, he's going to resurrect you. Yeah? So life doesn't end here. And that's a very cool promise. And this promise exactly is the one that Zoroastrianism makes. Yeah? So for sure, there was some... I recommend that you watch the Zoroastrianism lecture in YouTube, because this is exactly what Zoroaster tells his followers. Not only this is optimistic, right? It's like, don't worry, we will resurrect one day. Not only he says this, but also Ezekiel says that God tells him that I will set up over them one shepherd, my servant David. So there will be a descendant of David that will come to the world, and he shall feed them. He shall feed them and be their shepherd. So again, mimicking Isaiah, Ezekiel is telling the people of Israel that I know that things look very bad right now, that we lost our temple, that we're here in Babylon, exiled, but one day there will be someone who comes and fix all things. Very important verse for the Christians as well, okay? He's saying someone will come. Someone does eventually come to Babylon, but he's no one divine. He's called Cyrus the Great, and he's a Persian king. Comes into Babylon, conquers Babylon, and frees the Jews. Yeah? Cyrus is called the Messiah also. He's one of the great peoples, for the Jews and the Christians. just like Constantine the Great. Why? Because he did something very good for the Jews and the Christians. Yeah? So, by the way, this guy Cyrus, coming from Persia, he was a Zoroastrian. So he liked very much this religion that I told you about that has put a lot of focus on the eschatology. But Ezekiel is talking about someone who God sends himself, and he's a shepherd, and you know that if he's a shepherd, then he has sheep, etc., etc. You know this. Yeah? So the end of the story basically is that the Jews, they are saved by Cyrus, and they return to Jerusalem, to Judea, and live happily ever after. I don't know. Very complicated, right? But their worst times were over, at least. Yeah. And this is where I stop, and I'm going to recap here everything we have been talking about. I know this was not an easy lecture, but I hope you retain at least some flashes of what I've been saying. Yahweh's origin, which we don't know how to read, yeah, by the way. We talked about the Shasu of Yahweh. We talked about these peoples living in Sinai, the Midianites, right, in the 14th century or so BC. It's more a toponym, yeah, a name of a place, maybe, than a god. Yeah? Then we also talked how all these tribes that believed in these patriarchal religions that came from Babylon, right, and settled in Canaan. Then we also talked about Moses, and we also investigated the oldest parts of the Bible and how Yahweh seems to be a god of flash floods, something very dangerous. So you want to pray to him. Then we also talked how Yahweh and El, this wise god of the Canaanites, the people that were living before, he is assimilated, Yahweh, into El, yeah? Or El into Yahweh. So there is a lot of syncretism, meaning that there is a lot of fusion of elements between these two religions. Yeah? Syncretism in Canaan. And actually it's very interesting to see how in the story of Genesis, when we read it in Hebrew, the Genesis, yeah, it says Elohim created the heavens and the earth, etc. So it's not Yahweh. It's this part of Yahweh. It's the wise God that comes from El, that creates the world, etc. Then we see that not only there is syncretism here, but actually two gods of rain are too many for just one sky. So the two gods of the storm, one got too many. One has to go. And Baal disappears. Yeah? Then we saw how the prophets were gaslighting Israel into thinking that it was their fault that they had all of these invasions and that they were exiled into Babylon, etc. And we have also Isaiah's prophecy telling us that God will eventually fix it. He will send someone and fix it. Yeah? And then we have Ezekiel, who is the prophet of optimism and the prophet of weird visions also. And he's writing in the Babylonian exile, and he individualizes religion, and he also mentions the Messiah. Now, I have been moving up and down the Bible quite a lot, so I thought that just to end this, I thought it would be very interesting to look at the chronology of the Bible. So now that we know all of these stories that I have been telling you about, all sorts of different stories, and I told you that we can compare their language to know when they were written, let's try to organize some of them here so that you know how the Bible actually was written. 12th century BCE, we have this song of Deborah, Yahweh, the God of the rain. Okay? First, for sure, Yahweh is associated to some sort of God of the rain. Yeah? Maybe then we have exilic literature, and of course Ezekiel is here. Yeah? But then it may surprise you that post-exilic literature, so from 538, 332, we have the Torah. We have the Genesis, the Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. So if you would sort the Bible by chronologically, the Genesis would not be the first book that you have there. It would be the Song of Deborah. And Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, they are much, much, much later. So this story that God created the world out of nothing, etc., this was written only around 500 years before Christ. Yeah? And this story of creation, I recommend that you see the Babylonian lecture as well. Echoes a lot the Babylonian creation. Yeah? And then the story of Exodus with Moses, etc. That's just a dramatization. There were stories that, yeah, maybe there was some sort of, the Israelites, they were living close to Egypt and whatever, and maybe Moses was a historical figure, yeah? Living many centuries before, but all of these stories that people tell to one another, they trickle down and, yeah, they are dramatized only around 538 BC, yeah? And then, just to end this, the Hellenistic period, which means that this is the sort of post-Alexander Middle East, yeah, after Alexander the Great's conquest. Of course, they had a lot of Greek influence, yeah, afterwards, and a lot of Greek philosophy is inside of these books. And as I already told in the previous lecture, when I talked about the book of Job and Ecclesiastes, they were written around this time. My point is this. It's foolish, really. I mean, I cannot think of another word. It's foolish to think that there is some sort of deity at the top that dictates these words, word by word, yeah, and that this sort of this ordering is really arbitrary, because what happens really is that you have so many cultures, so many different religions that interact with one another. And just like you have fashion trends, it's like right now we have this shirt, I mean, I'm wearing this, but 300 years ago I would have been wearing some sort of tie here and a peruke. Just like you have trends in fashion, you have trends in this sort of ideas. And this is what Richard Dawkins, yeah, the evolutionary biologist, called memes. Yeah? So it's the way that ideas evolve and take from one another. Some survive, some do not. And yeah, the story itself is very interesting, but unfortunately I don't see anything divine in it. It's just people writing these stories. Yeah? And so I'm not going to extend more. I just want to welcome you on the 16th of June. Beautiful painting by Rembrandt here. We will try to know what this guy was about. Of course, being Jesus, yeah? Jesus of Nazareth. Let's see if he lives up to the prophecies written by Isaiah and by Ezekiel also.